Good morning. Welcome to our Max Minutes. Happy Friday to everyone as we all join and get our participants entering the room. We'll give everybody just a moment longer. A little brisk this morning outside, so I hope everyone's enjoying that and has great plans for the weekend. Here we go. Okay, we've got a packed agenda. I know that some people will continue entering the room, but let's go ahead and get this going because it's a fantastic topic that we're going to be talking about today. We have a 2021 legislative update, and you all know how public policy and legislation at the city, county, and state level and federal level affects everything that we do. So we're going to dive into the status of things. And many of you probably saw the kind of unexpected news last night about Mayor Bottoms and her decision not to run again. That may be a new topic for us to talk about today, perhaps. But before we get going, I do want to acknowledge our anchor sponsors for Max and help the folks that help make this possible. WorkSource Georgia, the Department of Labor, WorkSource Metro Atlanta, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, Goodwill of North Georgia, Career Rise, my organization, the Bobby Dodd Institute, and First Step Staffing are our anchor partners for Max right now. So without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed chair, Amy Lancaster King. And Amy, if you'll just take us home with the agenda and introduce our panel and we'll get going. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, John. Excited about the panel today, just given the part of the work that I do is lobbying. So I do like to geek out on some of this policy stuff. So I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to have today. I would like to introduce the panelists. We've got, and this isn't going to be exactly in the order that's on your screen, but Asenith Dixon, Senior Director, Government Relations at the College Board, Cosby Johnson, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Georgia Chamber, Polly McKinney, Advocacy Director at Voices for Georgia's Children, Tim Cairl, Senior Director, Education Policy at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and Marshall Guest, Senior Vice President, Public Policy and Business Climate at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. So I'm excited to have two teammates, and with that, we'll just get started here this morning. Thank you all for joining us. All in all, I do think the session was a pretty good session for education and workforce. I'd like to pass the first question to Marshall and Cosby, and just from the chamber perspective, I know we're in lots of areas beyond education and workforce, but given that kind of vein of education and workforce, what are some of the biggest wins from this session from your perspectives?
Cosby, why don't you kick things off?
Yeah, for sure, man. What I will say, Amy, to be honest, is for us, it was really a rebuilding year. We lost who we felt like was a champion for some of the things that we worked on in PK Martin. And as he transitioned out from that leadership position in the Senate, we really had to spend a year rebuilding relationships, finding new champions, and really what I will say is satiating or tilling some new ground for legislators. And so for us, it was really a rebuilding year, getting our important things in front of new leaders and new legislators, both in the House and the Senate. For everyone who may need to know, we had two chairs change over, both in the House and the Senate, where we had to do some work bringing them up to speed on the things that are important to us. One of the two things that I think are important for us is a study committee done by Wes Cantrell that really focuses on the global talent workforce. And that's something Daniela has been working on for a while. And we are just excited about that moving forward to see what we can really flesh out over this time in that study committee, really focusing on things like the visa process, how do students transition more easily, more immigrant students transition more easily in our systems, whether it's through K-12 or post-secondary. And that's some things that we're going to focus on in that study committee. The other thing that I think we are really going to focus on is tuition parity for DACA recipients. We've seen Casey Carpenter have that bill and move that bill a little bit, or try and move it in committee. And we know sometimes that in dealing in that space, it can be pretty tough to move a bill on both sides. You have a left that says maybe the bill doesn't go far enough or include enough people, and you have the right who don't want to do much around the issue of immigration or DACA recipients. So I applaud Casey Carpenter for being as strong as he is and really holding that bill and continue to press it. That's something that I think everybody will continue to chip away at next year, and hopefully change the way that bill is looked at as it moves through the process. But really, Amy, just hard work getting people up to speed on our issues.
Cosby, that was a really good overview of what took place. Yeah, the first year of a 2-year session, you always have new faces and new folks that you're meeting, trying to educate on the different policy areas that you're focused on as an organization. But one issue that I wanted to bring forward that the Metroland Chamber was heavily involved in, and really, it's funny that I'm answering this question. I mean, Amy was the one who really spearheaded a lot of this work, but around Senate Bill 105. And that really built on the work that the Metroland Chamber was involved in last year with the Second Chances legislation that passed the General Assembly in June of 2020 and signed into law. And of course, this law, the Second Chances law, restricts access to certain criminal records when employment background checks are performed. So that was really important. But this year, we again partnered with the Georgia Justice Project to help further address people reentering the workforce who have been convicted of a crime by pursuing probation reform legislation. That's what Senate Bill 105 is really about, probation reform. And this legislation reduces the number of individuals serving those what can be lengthy probation sentences by creating a pathway for early termination that individuals can access after serving 3 years of probation if they meet certain criteria. So in Georgia, there are approximately about 190,000 people on felony probation, of which a quarter will qualify for early termination of probation. So this legislation is really important, just signed into law this week, because it gives people a better chance to reenter the workforce and fill those available jobs. So a strong workforce tie here. So Amy.
Marshall said in the practice session about taking yourself off of mute before you start talking, and I was like, oh, don't worry about it. It's a nice crowd. And then there I go doing it. Well, I've broken the ice. Everybody can do it now, so it's okay. So we are talking about workforce, and that's a big deal. And one of the biggest challenges around getting people back into the workforce is around childcare. And so, Polly, paid parental leave made some big headway this year. Can you talk about that and what that means for the state and where else we need to go with that?
Yeah, it was House Bill 146 by Representative Gaines, and it just got signed this week as well. And it basically offers paid parental leave for state employees. So I was going to pull up some numbers really quick from the most accurate summary I have. Sorry, I've got too many pages open. But basically, it offers about 120 hours over a rolling 365-day period for state employees. So there are a lot of folks who, and it's for adopting a baby, taking a child into foster care, having a baby. So there are like so many state employees who aren't, the way we look at it at Voices for Georgia's Children, who aren't earning enough and who are for what they do, but who are doing it because they're mission driven, like so many state workers. And this makes life a lot more, makes the employment for the state, like wanting to work for the state, a lot more welcoming. Because as we all know, bringing a new human being into your family is really stressful, and to have to worry about losing your job or having to not be truthful about why you're taking time off or all of those things is a really big deal. And I know it's been in a journey since about, before 2017, but for a long time, a lot of us have been working on paid time off flexibility. And we have the Family Care Act already that passed back in 2017 for businesses that already offer paid time off to allow flexibility within that time off to take care of a family member instead of just yourself. And then I guess a year or two ago, the speaker said that folks working at the Capitol could have flexible paid time off. And now this. And so this is really a huge, we feel like it's a huge win in sort of a coming of age for the awareness of the fact that you can work better when you're not so stressed out about what's going on at home. basically, or about losing your job for adopting a child and needing to take that time to make sure that the family is healthy. So that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of it.
Thank you, Polly. I heard an interesting report yesterday about the census and the declining birth rate and how these kind of laws that support primarily women to have children, and that's a big deal, especially as we're trying to come out of COVID and get more women back into the workforce, that they took the biggest hit, that this is all, it's good timing, I'll say.
Well, and I might say that we're struggling to maintain women, as you said, to keep women in the workforce. And it's not just women who would get this leave. I mean, there are a lot of fathers who are taking care of their children as well. And I think that this is sort of a new awareness for the employer world about how important it is to have that support when you're trying to be a good whole person. So.
Asenith and Tim, you guys do a lot on pushing for, the budget, putting our money where our mouth is around investing in our children and education. Tell us some of the progress that was made this year in the budget along those lines.
I guess I'll kick it off, Tim. So essentially this year, what we saw was a lot of, I guess, one way to put it is a lot of consideration for federal dollars that have been coming in from DC for the last year and will go on for the next couple. So instead of dedicating state funds to new programs or to do some important things, sometimes it's good to use some of the federal dollars to shore up some of the programs that have seen declines or decreased investment over the last few years. So the General Assembly definitely took that into mind and used a lot of dollars, whether it be state or federal, to cover broadband expansion in rural areas of our state. That will continue to help restore some funding to the overall state funding formula for education, as well as to help with ag ed, CTE programs, communities and schools, our regional education service agencies. Like, there was just so much that was done because we have a little bit more leeway, and our governor and our state superintendent are working well together, I would say. But just to focus in on the programs that I cover as the College Board's Director of Government Relations, we create the Advanced Placement Program, which allows students to take college level courses in high school. And we are very much, as was everyone on this call, very much into increasing or expanding computer science course availability to students across our state. And as we keep moving towards the deadline of having a computer science course in every high school by the 2024-2025 school year, we have continued to push for increased professional development dollars for teachers. So we were so lucky, and it was so awesome that we were able to get that number moved up to $1 million to cover PD in the 2021-2022 school year. We also were able to have some course expansion grants in the budget, which would cover a new pilot for an advanced placement CSP or computer science principles program in schools that don't have any AP. There were dollars set aside for more computer science course expansion to expand STEM and advanced placement STEM virtually in rural areas of the state without any courses, STEM or AP STEM. And then there was also rural coding equipment set aside that goes directly to the Georgia Cyber Center that's in Augusta. So all of this to not only increase computer science course availability, but also to meet the workforce needs that are out there. We want to make sure our students are prepared for the new technology jobs and everything that comes along with that. So that was done. And then also the budget also covers and continues to cover advanced placement exams for students. It's a very it's a bit of a complex approach, but it's nice to know that each student in our state has the opportunity to have their exam covered and earn that early college credit. And then, Tim, are there other things you think we should highlight?
Just on the computer science note, giving credit to where it's due. Well, one, Asenith, if y'all didn't know this, Asenith isn't just Georgia. She's across the Southeast and advocates for these issues across many states. So props, because a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned would not have happened without your and Callie's work on this. But number two was, we received significant support this year from the Lieutenant Governor's office and moving computer science forward. And Mike Dudgeon, who just recently left the Lieutenant Governor's office, was another champion for computer science and for a lot of things Asenith just mentioned. And our House Education Appropriations new chair, Representative Todd Jones. On some other notes, I want to talk for a second about CAPS funding, the Child and Parent Services funding. This is a subsidy for low-income households whose parents are either working or in school, and it covers the market cost of childcare. And just to set the stage, we think about the cost of how much it costs to put a child into a childcare center is on par with a full-time state tuition in a college. So quite hefty for a lot of families and really out of reach for a lot of working parents. So the CAP subsidy provides a high quality early learning environment for a lot of children across our state. And just to set the stage, we have this CAP subsidy, and then we had CARES dollars that were coming down from the federal government. The CARES dollars really helped insulate the system that exists. So the childcare providers that provide this care and provide after school care, and you had providers that were really doing some extra work around the pandemic. And that CARES dollars really helped insulate that to try to keep what was there intact. And the CAP subsidy is the ongoing support for parents who are working or in school. So this was a big deal. And this increased subsidy is going to provide about 600 more families with the opportunity to put their kids into high quality early learning centers. So this was a big win. I think it's one of the most significant increases we've had in a number of years. We're still got a ways to go, but it was a good signal that the state's going to continue to invest in high quality early learning. And huge props to our Commissioner Amy Jacobs at the Department of Early Care and Learning and her staff for really trying to make sure that high quality early learning stayed an option for parents all through the pandemic. So they really have been working to keep that going and to continue the high quality all the way through. So just wanted to touch on that. It was a big deal.
And then just as a note to think about what the state has done with regard to savings on remote working and rent, and how they move some of those dollars over to support some of our state programs. So there's been savings that the state has definitely taken advantage of too.
And then one other thing I'd like to add in, I guess, moderator privilege is Asenith I can't talk this morning. As Asenith mentioned earlier about the CARES money, at the beginning, before session started, Governor Kemp announced the $5 million towards gap funding for post-secondary education to help needs-based or low-income students. So that was a really big win, and we hope to see something along the lines of continuing that type of investment into our post-secondary students in the state. Anybody else have anything that they want to add that highlights some of the budget wins or maybe budget losses this year as it pertains to education and workforce items?
I might just throw in really quick, Amy, that pre-K got, Georgia pre-K got a 2.5% increase, which is the biggest in over 10 years, the biggest increase that program has had. And it serves about 82,000 kids, 4-year-olds in our state. So I think that was certainly notable. So
that's awesome. It is great to hear all of the investment that's happening at that early ages for sure. So this is to everybody. Of the bills that didn't make it out this session, what are you hoping to see happen next session?
Hey, this is Cosby. I will kind of go back to something I definitely said before, but House Bill 120 in that, docket is something that we really are hoping we see, that creates a needless barrier for students who have grown up in Georgia, who call Georgia home, who came here through no fault of their own, through no decision of their own, and have been exceptional members of our state and have given to our state. And if you understand, if anyone understands, what out-of-state tuition or that kind of number looks like, even at a larger university, we got to understand that those barriers even exist in smaller places like about Valdosta State or Georgia Southern. What that difference in that tuition is truly a barrier for students. So I think that is something that's, insanely important, something that we're going to keep highlighting, whether it's through the study committee, whether it's, with Casey Carpenter around the state. Chris is talking about it at all of his regional stops to really begin to work that issue and massage that issue into a place where it's not so vitriolic or divisive. And that's something that we're going to continue to grind away on. So I know everyone has done some work on that, but that's something that I would love to see pass next year.
Thank you, Cosby. Anybody else?
Marsha, you want to go?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll follow you up.
So sweet. Well, just to piggyback on what Cosby was saying about tuition and making sure students are able to afford it. With advanced placement, again, I'll bring this up. We know that students can earn early college credit by taking the exam that goes along with the course. One thing that's unique about Georgia is we don't have a credit policy in place. So even though students are able to earn this early credit, there is no guarantee that the universities and colleges in our state will accept their exam scores for a 101 or 102 course. Many times it ends up being an elective, and we don't want students to take the same courses over and over. And we definitely don't want those who are unable to afford tuition in the first place to have to then go back and pay for this again, or for the Hope Scholarship to cover courses that the state has already paid for by supporting students through the exam. So we'll continue to work on that as the years as we move forward.
Yeah, and I was just going to bring forward some of the discussion around the needs-based aid program or gap funding, depending on the verbiage used. But this year in the General Assembly, we saw legislation introduced, and we've seen legislation introduced like this in previous years too, but this year there was a constitutional amendment introduced to legalize online sports betting, and a portion of that revenue, at least in the Senate version that passed out, would have included funding for needs-based scholarships, and the Senate version was actually 50% of the sports betting revenue would have gone to needs-based scholarships. It would have covered a couple areas, other areas too, including rural healthcare and broadband. And of course, it passed the Senate with a bipartisan vote. And so that was really, really encouraging. It went to the House and it was modified. There was still some funding in the House version that would have gone towards needs-based, and there was additional funding that would have come from that sports betting revenue that would have gone to the Hope Scholarship and Hope Grant, as well as other areas. So the good thing is this is the first year of a 2-year session, so all these bills are still alive going into 22, but expect to see continued focus around the push for needs-based scholarships, really complement the Hope Scholarship. And again, give Amy Lancaster King credit here. She's been talking about needs-based scholarships and the importance of those for a number of years, really dating back to the work that she spearheaded with the Your Talent, Your Future effort. And I know a lot of folks on this call had a lot to do with that work too. But we've been talking about the need for needs-based scholarships for a number of years, and hopefully 22 is the year that we can see dedicated funding really put towards those scholarships, and really make a meaningful difference in a lot of people's lives moving forward. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks, Marshall. I'll pay you later.
Amy, I might add a couple of things that I didn't hear mentioned that happened this year and that we're looking forward to next year. One of the things is the bill that passed, that is Senator Tippin's bill that would create a pilot program for kids who are 16 and over to go to TCSG, to technical colleges, and achieve a high school diploma. So that's we feel like that's a pretty big thing. It was certainly important enough to the Senate to pass it relatively late, compared to a lot of stuff that we all work on, and that there was a budget note in the FY22 budget that in the amended, if that bill passed, it in the amended funds would be allocated to it. And then and it also urged the university system to do the same. No, it didn't. I've got that mixed up, because the other one that passed that does urge the university system is the bill that would waive fees in technical colleges for kids who have been or are in the foster care system, which we find that there's an abysmal graduation rate for those kids in high school and in college. And we want to do everything we can to support some of our most vulnerable kids in the most vulnerable situations. And that's the bill that also urges the university system to waive those fees as well. So we were excited about those, and I just forgot to mention those earlier. But coming up on it, something that Voices is really interested in, which made it through the House but didn't get to the Senate floor yet, is the bill that raises the age of juvenile court jurisdiction, just to go back to some of the probation reform ideas. And children in Georgia who are 17 are considered adults by our criminal justice system, period, regardless of what the offense is. And we know from a lot of our science and from other states that those kids are better served by juvenile court, which is more restorative, and also keeps them from having to worry as much about a criminal record when they're served in juvenile court, because those records can be sealed easier. And so we have been really pushing to raise the age of juvenile court jurisdiction to include 17-year-olds, nonviolent, the less serious crimes, a lot of misdemeanors. And that, I think, as far as workforce development goes, is really, really important, because we all know how hard it is to get a job when you have a criminal record. And that's something, we're the last of 3 states in the nation that treat 17-year-olds as adult in our criminal justice system. So we really want to get that one over the finish line next year. I think that'll be a really big win for the state and for workforce. So those are my things.
Thank you, Polly. I think we lost Tim. He must be having technical difficulties. So yes, he just confirmed. So there's one other thing I'd like to mention, was a study committee on needs-based aid that came out of the Senate. Senator Nan Orrock, it passed out of the Senate, but didn't make it out of the House yet. So there's still, it's in rules, and so hopefully it will make it out of the House. But I do think that there is value in having more conversation. Just as we know, putting money at things is not the only answer. It's how that money is administered and to make it useful. And flexibility is key, but I would love to see movement on that. I think having those conversations will be helpful. Tim, welcome back. You had mentioned something earlier. I wanted to tag on something around professionals in the classroom that you mentioned.
Yeah, so Representative Mike Chokas has been helping carry a bill that would allow for industry professionals to actually teach into a classroom. So you think about, I'm going to zero in specifically on more kind of skills-based or CTE work inside the classroom. When you bring an industry professional in, there's often a partnership that forms between the teacher and the industry professional in developing curriculum and lesson plans and projects. So we just want to highlight that effort, particularly as you think about the need to bring in skills and project-based learning into a classroom for students. It just will add a world of opportunities for a lot of students that normally wouldn't have access to that type of thing until much further on beyond K-12. So we hope to see that bill comes back and actually passes next year.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I was hearing feedback and it throws me off. So one other piece, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A function, and John will help field any questions that you may have. But one other thing, as we look to we've talked about next session and some of the things that we hope to see happen, but there's a big piece that has to happen before we even get to next session. So I want to pose this to Marshall and Cosby around redistricting.
Yeah, so redistricting and reapportionment. This is something that the legislature does once every 10 years. The last time redistricting and reapportionment occurred in Georgia was in 2011. And it occurs after the U.S. Census is fully completed. And redistricting and reapportionment is about redrawing legislative maps, state house, state senate, congressional, and those local maps as well. So county offices, municipal offices, etc. So we expect that process to take place once all the census data is fully submitted, sometime October, November, maybe. Typically it takes place in September, but a bit of a delay this year getting that census data in. So yeah, that process will kick off in the form of a special session. It'll probably take about 2 weeks or so. But they will draw the maps, which will be used in the upcoming cycle in 22, taking effect in 23 and carrying us through the rest of the decade. So what the, again, state senate, state house, and congressional maps look like. What's different this time than in 2011 is in 2011, Georgia got an additional congressional seat. This year, Georgia's not expected to pick up. They're not going to get a new congressional seat. So we'll be redrawing those congressional maps using the same number, 14 congressional seats. So yeah, that's the next time the General Assembly in all likelihood will meet this year. And that's on redistricting and reapportionment.
Marshall hit the nail on the head, and I couldn't say it any better. One of the things that I will say is that these times tend to be contentious, especially around the rebuilding or redrawing of kind of the state house districts. I know down where I'm from in Brunswick, it may look like we, may lose a seat in some of these places that are losing populations. You have to redraw the lines and put people in different places. So, it is definitely something to watch, but it's also something for those in local communities, kind of like myself down in Brunswick, to make sure that as those lines change, we are ensuring that we're reaching out to the correct leaders, making sure that if we have new city centers that are drawn in, like let's say right now down here is kind of Brunswick by itself, but if we get drawn in with a Camden or up to a Darien and maybe all the way up to a Midway, then you start to really have different leaders coming out of those areas that you want to talk to and begin to talk about your issues, whether locally or on a statewide level. So it gets, extremely granular in this place, and it can become very contentious down at the Capitol, but, appreciate the speaker and his leadership as we walk through this process definitely the right way.
Yeah, Cosby, it is the most partisan of processes that probably exists, to your point, as far as contentiousness goes. So it's a good follow-up.
I'm sorry, Marshall. Can we talk? This is my first time going through this redistricting process as a lobbyist and involved in policy. And so I'm seeing a lot of people make announcements for bigger offices, right? And it seems like there's quite a lot. And I'm sure can you talk about how that's kind of impacting the redistricting process and what that means, say, in the 23 session or 23-24 session, like where to, there's going to be a lot of new faces, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Cosby, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you're seeing a convergence of two things, right? The redistricting process where people they imagine that their, seats become different numbers in a way that they don't want to continue to be in that seat. So it's kind of this up or out mentality. It's like, well, I'm probably not going to be dealing with the same district, so take a shot statewide. But to be very honest, a lot of the people that we are seeing, I think at least, and I'll speak from the Democratic side, are people who have been kind of, lining up to take that shot anyway. So, I don't know if redistricting pressed them to get out there. When you see a B or a Derek Jackson on the Democratic side, those are people who had kind of been talking about it before. But I think especially for some Metro Democrats and Republicans, I think inside of that Metro Atlanta area, how you draw those seats, will definitely differentiate between whether, people will continue to be in that seat or not. One of the guys who was a good friend of everyone's, who I think is a victim to just changing demographics, is somebody like a Brett Harrell. Amazing guy, chairman of Ways and Means. Unfortunately, he lost his seat and now lives down here in my community down on St. Simon's. But he was someone who saw it changing and changing in a way where, you probably couldn't get any more finicky with the lines and still keep him there. So, you definitely have a lot of, what I would call Brett Harrells who see some changing tide and kind of move on.
So I want to go ahead, Marshall.
Cosby captured it.
I want to kind of pose this question to Asenith and Polly and Tim, those of y'all that focus on like educational workforce space. So what does that mean for y'all if we have a whole new group of people to educate, bring up to speed, lots of, musical chairs happening? How do you, what does that mean for you guys?
I'll say it probably means a lot of work off session. So as you have new folks come in, there's a learning curve, particularly on some of these deeper issues that some lawmakers come in knowing, some specialized things, particularly if they're in a particular industry or a particular job background, or they have some community experience in a particular area, like a higher ed or a technical college or something like that. But I'm thinking specifically around early learning and career and technical ed. Sometimes it can be as simple as just, we go with some other groups to lead tours of institutions and early learning centers and classrooms. And then sometimes it's just sitting down one-on-one and having conversations about policies like the CAP subsidy, computer science funding. I mean, that's just sort of how I look at it. Is it's rebuilding relationships. It's like walking into a room full of new people. I think about it, when you go to a convention for the second or third time, you'll have tables of people that and you'll be like, oh, hey, it's great to see you again. How's that thing going? Or how's your family? And then you'll have some tables that you sit at where you don't know anybody. You kind of got to start over. So that's just sort of how I look at it.
Yeah, I think Tim's right. I would say that we have had significant turnover even without redistricting every year. I mean, we had a year where there were 40 new members. So it's not like every new election, every new term is sort of like that for all of us in a way anyway. I will say that my post-traumatic stress response from last redistricting is that, one, you're going to get all of the freshmen who have like big ideas and are really excited about being there and may not know how an agency works and propose legislation that's already happening, or the feds won't let us do, or whatever. You always have those bills. So you're always trying to help them, educate them. But the other thing is that there's usually sour grapes somewhere in the Capitol around the redistricting after it happens. And that for us at Voices doesn't usually affect a lot of what we do, but it does sort of flavor the legislative session experience, if you might say. So.
And I'd just add that, some of that, everything that Tim said, everything that Polly said, and then in many cases, you can keep your leaders. So maybe the governor's not going to change, your chairman won't change typically. So you can rely on them to understand where you're coming from and what you're looking to do that year. Team up with really good people like Tim and Polly and Marshall and Amy and Cosby to continue to move the line, move the needle. But then I'll just throw this out there because I do, like Tim said, cover many states in the South. And then I picked up Massachusetts and Rhode Island this year, which is crazy. So meeting new people is just part of what we do, trying to find the legislators who know what you're talking about and have similar ideas and are willing to really just be a thought partner with you. It's always relationship building, and it's always how can we help each other, help students and teachers and educators as a whole.
Awesome, thank you all. So any final thoughts, or I mean, one other question, and I'm sorry if just how what's happening at the federal level kind of impacting or flavoring what's happening here at the state level?
I'll add one around education funding that came up a couple times this session, which was the CARES money that was coming down for education. For some legislators, there was a not understanding the difference between what those federal dollars were coming for and what the state dollars are used for. So that was quite a hurdle, I would say, in the midst of pandemic and trying to work on other programs that we were sort of hitting that front as well. So the federal dollars were really about again, kind of like the Department of Early Care and Learning money. It was really about shoring up and helping districts who were, particularly the districts that were in a quick shift mode where they had to go from in learning to at home. And so they're having to do things like get devices, figure out Wi-Fi. And then for those that were in a hybrid or in-person model, it's reconfiguring their HVAC systems, so these big kind of infrastructure lifts on either side is where a lot of that CARES Act dollars were going. And that's in addition to the salaries and all of the other things that go into a state budget. So I would say, that was a little bit of a hurdle to try to overcome with helping people navigate the difference between where those dollars are going and where the state dollars are going. Still is, to be honest.
Yeah, I would add that part of the thing that people don't realize is that when those dollars come, there is a really short turnaround. And to help lawmakers understand the speed with which government had to respond and how fast our state agencies had to go from 0 to 100 to use those dollars. The other thing is that when that much money comes in, it comes with strings. And so you see policy change happen because if you want the money, you need to shift. So for instance, pandemic EBT, getting our food supply out there was a lot of good flexibility, telehealth, flexibilities around how we can access healthcare through our tablets or our phones, were a lot of things that were game changers in terms of policy. And we've seen legislation since then to lock some of those things in. And so I think that people forget that happens. And now we're all waiting on guidance for the rescue monies, the American Rescue Plan Act, that are coming into the state. And that's a lot of money. And we don't have guidance yet from the Treasury Department for most, if not all of it, to know how that's going to change what we do in the interim and what we legislate, what we like that we keep in policy for forever or for the foreseeable future. And that's a lot. I mean, DECAL, the Department of Early Care and Learning, is getting more money in the Rescue Plan Act than their annual budget, just to give you an example of how much we're looking at. And that's, we're seeing changes coming with, we believe, after school and summer enrichment for kids that will be driven by those dollars. We're going to see changes in Department of Ed. We're going to see changes in all kinds of places. So.
Polly, thank you. I think about that as we always, as policy people, we want flexibility in how those funds are used, but like not having any direction at all means it's just frozen, right? Like you've got to have some direction. So kind of a catch-22 in a sense, but Tim, one other area that kind of straddles the whole state and federal piece is this performance testing for schools. Can you talk a little bit about that and where we're at and some of that journey?
Yeah, so Georgia, along with a couple of other states, is in a unique position. We waived the end of course tests last year, as most states did, recognizing that we were under extreme circumstances come April, May of last year. This year, the test is the statewide test, which I want to differentiate. This is the one time per year, usually about one per grade level course test that is done, that is different from your regular course tests or tests that the school itself may administer separate. This is the federally mandated one. So Georgia is administering that this year. And why this is important is this is what everybody from parents to teachers to policymakers to economic development to, you name it, the community at large looks at to determine how well our students are doing. And it's across a variety of factors. And it's really to look at, the way I look at it is talking about progress. Are we moving the ball forward on literacy, on math and STEM skills, on high school graduation? It's all of those kind of markers that we follow. And Georgia is administering that one assessment this year. We also have a number of pilots that are running. So there were a significant test pilot programs, which would change it from an end of year or end of course assessment to a series of smaller assessments, almost like we would think of it, not really midterms, if you remember from those days, not really midterms, but more small pieces that then add up to a final score. So if you remember sitting in those classes when your teacher tells you don't have a final, but your quizzes and homework all added to it, and you get really excited, that's this kind of move. So we're excited. Allison Timberlake at the Department of Education leads that effort, and she's really been a champion on keeping Georgia at the front of what's new and what's maybe a little bit different on the assessment and information piece. So we're excited about that. It's still, I want to paint perspective. It's still going to be a few years before any of those pilots, if they show promise or merit, are actually put into full implementation. But it is interesting that Georgia always seems to sort of come from the back of the pack and move to the front on these innovative ways of looking at data and education. So that's a big deal. If you want more information about that, I'm happy to talk with anyone after to share that information. I would highly recommend, if you haven't looked at the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education's website, particularly around the top 10 issues. This has been in that top 10 for a number of years, and it's something that the chamber and the business community, I think, really pays attention to.
Thank you, Tim. We've got one question from Ann Kramer around apprenticeships. Any pieces that passed or any pieces in the works around apprenticeships and internships?
Yeah, we had a bill the previous session, right before a pandemic shut down. One was to really match up what the state has in law about particularly high school apprenticeship and internship programs, and really aligning that with how the Department of Education does its work. So our Department of Education here in Georgia has kind of a playbook that they use to help train career and technical educators and work-based learning coordinators in school districts. But none of that work is anywhere in the Title 20 Georgia Education Code, the Georgia Education Law. So we started an effort last session to do some of that alignment and really help broaden the opportunities that students might have for apprenticeships and internships. So we really we will probably pick that back up next year once the pandemic slowly starts to recede from the front burner, and put that back on. I do think that a lot of the efforts that we saw this year, particularly like the professionals in the classroom and some of these other are huge pieces of that. And also the work that Asenith is doing around AP, particularly AP STEM and AP Rural STEM. I see it all as like a convergence of those things that the apprenticeship and internship is just a big component of. So we'll keep working on it.
And to add, there was an increase in the budget to offset austerity reductions that included youth apprenticeship. And then two, the College Board is working very closely with CS for All, which is a national initiative to increase AP computer science access to students who are a part of the JROTC program, whether it's in all of the branches. So that's something that we also lobby federally, and there'll be more to come on that as I push that in Georgia. That's one of the focuses, I don't know if that's the right word, but that I have with some of this budget money that's focused on STEM and CSP.
So on a much lighter note, I wanted to add, just as a final kind of question, lobbying this session was different than it was in the past. It's very similar to what we did in the the remainder of the 2020 session, but talk about how that works for y'all and something that you're looking forward to as it transitions back, possibly, or if you think it's going to transition back to the real chaos that it was before.
I'll add one, which is, I'm looking forward to getting back out around the state again. And there's some really selfish parts of this. One is, I've gotten used to my schedule, including things like going to Dickey Farms to pick up peaches and going to North Georgia farmers markets to get the strawberries I want. So there's some food and some personal things in there that I'm interested in putting back in my schedule because I really missed it last year. But yeah, just getting out and seeing a little more of the state and using it as an opportunity to travel. And you really forget that Georgia is the largest state east of the Mississippi until you get out there and start driving and realize you've been driving for 5 hours and haven't gotten to the other end of the state yet. So I'll throw that one out there.
Go ahead, Marshall.
All right, if you insist, Asenith. I'll just say that I think I've been through 17 or 18 legislative sessions now. The June session from last year was certainly unique, middle of COVID. This year was much like last year. One of the challenges is it's hard to interact with members of the General Assembly in that environment, particularly through the committee process. And that's what I miss, is just being able to sit in a committee room, hear the comments, not watching over Zoom. And, when you hear something, sometimes it's appropriate to raise your voice and testify and, raise some of the issues that they may be contemplating in legislation. This isn't related to education and workforce necessarily, but we did see some bills move through the General Assembly this year involving tax policy that there wasn't an opportunity to provide input. And so we got legislation on day 40 that you saw some language, and this happens, but it had never been vetted. No one had ever seen it before. And it ends up in the Conference Committee report and it's approved. And, if there was an opportunity to raise your hand and say, well, look, I understand what you're trying to do, but maybe if you approach it this way, it would be more workable. It would have worked, what they proposed and what they passed. But now we have language in bills that even get signed into law that are problematic. We're going to have to come back in 22 and try to address. So just sitting in that committee room, even those Ways and Means committee rooms, which can be pretty tough because it's cramped space, and I'm ready for that to return. So that's my selfish request.
I miss conferences. I miss getting on planes. But even just being at the Capitol and everything that Marshall said, which is, if something comes up in committee or someone has a bright idea, you can stop them in the hall. I mean, it's just all the things that don't happen when you're only watching. And if someone chooses not to take your phone call or is too busy, there's just a lot that goes on when you're in person. And seriously speaking, just being at the Capitol makes a difference in your ability to reach your goals each year. So totally miss it, Amy.
Yeah, and I just echo everything everyone has said. The thing about the session is that it's wonderful because being at the Capitol, you have everybody in that building, and it's not just the lawmakers, you know, that we like to get access to, and we like to be able to weigh in committees and things, but it's actually having judges pass through, other lobbyists pass through, who we use each other. We use each other for our knowledge and our ideas, and we're always sharing intel or bouncing ideas off or learning more, which helps us do our work better. But yeah, I will welcome that back, as well as just this being around people who are funny and very smart and very witty, which we're all people, or we wouldn't do these jobs in the first place. And it's kind of lonely to be watching, 3 Zooms at one time and not be able to crack a joke to somebody. So I think that's one of the things I'll be eager to get back to.
Polly, it's funny you say that, because when some people come down to the Capitol for the first time, it's like 10 o'clock, sessions convening, and you see lobbyists just standing around the halls, and it looks like we're not doing anything. But that's the point in the day when information is just flying around that building. We're exchanging ideas and knowledge and whatnot, and we probably get more done in that hour than we do sometimes the rest of the day. So yeah, just that experience, being around other folks like you're talking about. I totally agree.
I've described it before as I get paid to stalk people. And if you can't have access to them, you can't stalk them quite so well. And then I will say one great addition to this last session was the Georgia Capitol memes on Instagram. So that's been fun, and I've enjoyed that. We do have a question from Melvin. Melvin, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, good morning. Marshall, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
You too, Melvin.
Could you speak? I know what you talk about, being down at the Capitol, having served there myself. Mm-hmm. And Brett Harrell was in the seat when he took the seat that I had, and I served with him on council in Snellville. Could you speak a little bit about the tax credit bill that the governor signed?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief because I know that's not the focus of this panel. But yeah, Senate Bill 6, there was an omnibus tax package that passed on day 40, contained probably 7 or 8 different provisions benefiting companies like Lockheed Martin in their efforts to secure additional federal contracts. That was a big win. The Woodruff Arts Center had a sales tax exemption. All arts, performance arts centers benefited from this, but particularly Woodruff. Legislation that would help extend the competitive projects of regional significance was in there. The mega tax credit was in there. So a number of items. But there was also language inserted on day 40 that impacts single tenant user data centers. This exemption had been in place since the early 2000s and had been left untouched. A sunset was inserted on day 40, and it will sunset in 2 years. But what's weird about it is it sunsets in the middle of a calendar year, at the end of the fiscal year, when this is a calendar year exemption. And so like that simple little change, like we could have raised our hand and said, I understand what you're trying to do with the sunset, but it should be on a calendar year basis, not in the middle of the calendar year. And then there was some other language inserted in that bill that no one had seen before that impacts our wireless companies in Georgia. And so again, came out of the blue, but a lot of good in that bill. It was signed into law this week. We were certainly supportive of that as the Metroland Chamber, but there was some language, again, I just mentioned that needs to be addressed in 22. So we can continue to secure these data centers and things like that for economic development purposes well into the future.
Thank you, Marshall. Well, we are at time, and so I just want to thank you all. It is wonderful having such a knowledgeable group to serve on the panel. You guys are fabulous, and it's just like I can soak it all up. So thank you so much for joining us today. We know some people had problems with the link getting in, so expect to get lots of views on our Max YouTube channel for this one. So, but again, thank you all for taking the time to be with us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, it was really a fantastic panel. It's always fascinating to hear from you all. So thank you all again. Very quickly, I know that we're at time, but I want to remind you all that Max is now a membership organization. To get the full benefits of your Max organization, please become a member. And we have the link in the chat box that you can follow. Next Max Minutes, it's going to be May 21st, Friday, same time, same place. Friday morning at 9 a.m., May 21st. We're going to talk about child support enforcement. And specifically their work around non-custodial parent programs. So please join us for that. Again, many, many thanks to all of our anchor sponsors. You all have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.